Hello and welcome to your Thursday night edition of the Scotland Rugby News podcast in what has possibly been the quietest news week for rugby on the planet and in our wee country of Scotland. But anyway, we'll see what we can eke out for the next few minutes. A quick word from our sponsor before we kick off. The Scotland Rugby News podcast is brought to you by S1 Jobs. If it's time to hand in your transfer request, and head over to s1jobs.com and upload your CV tonight. There are thousands of jobs all across Scotland and you can find the one for you. So you can start your search today. Gav, I don't know how we're going to deal with this because there's virtually nothing happening at the moment.
I've had a great week. Feet up, TV on. Easy as you like.
There is no Scotland Rugby News this week, so we'll just have to talk about traitors, I think, because there's very little else going on.
There's nothing else worth discussing.
So it's been the complete opposite of all. It has been loud. There has been so much. And I think there's only one place to start. Obviously, Edinburgh, there's been a lot of speculation for a long time. You've asked a lot of questions about the future coaching makeup at Edinburgh, and it's been announced that Sean Everitt has been extended until 2028. Is that right?
Yeah, summer of 2028.
And have you got, what's the detail to this? So I'm always amazed when I ask you, when a player's in contract, out contract, what's happening, and you seem to know. I don't think that information's in the public domain. If it is, it's not a domain I'm flirting with. But what does that mean for Sean?
So Sean's contract, I think Sean obviously signed for Edinburgh initially 2023 and was senior coach, which was an interesting distinction. It's a bit like the distinction that's got Ruben Amorim, the sack at Man United, where everybody else has been head coach, and Sean was brought over as or everybody else in the football analogy had been manager. Ruben Amorim was brought over as head coach. Sean was brought over as senior coach, which seemed strange at the time. In January 24, he signed a new contract, which was as head coach, which ran out in the summer to come, and they've been in talks, I think, with Scottish Rugby for, I think, as far as I can gather, some time. We spoke to Alex Williamson, who's obviously the CEO, when Gregor's contract was announced, because they obviously announced Gregor and Franco together in September. And it was curious that Sean's name wasn't included in that. So those conversations have gone on, and we've got to a point where Sean's now signed a new contract, and as I say, it's the summer of 2028. Edinburgh announced it by press release yesterday, and people would have seen all that on social media, etc. And then when Sean, just as a sort of par for the course, named his team to play Bath, we spoke to him this morning. So there's a piece on the site that details some of his ambitions and his plans, and I think he's acknowledged the fact that the response has not been overwhelmingly positive. In fact, it's been the complete opposite. And I think he's got a lot of work to do to get Edinburgh fans back on side. I'm interested to see if he can turn that tide. But he keeps pointing to the development of young Scottish players particularly. But look, I think we've talked about Edinburgh often enough here, and people will have their own views, but the consistency of results and the consistency of performances still isn't there. But as we've seen with Scottish Rugby's sort of men at the top, they've stuck by Gregor despite maybe results being not what they want. They've obviously stuck by Franco, thank goodness. We'll talk about Glasgow later. And now they've stuck by Sean. It feels a little bit like, it was the inevitable decision because it was the easy decision.
Some people I've read quite a lot of the comments, but some of them were questioning the timing. But the timing makes sense because you're not going to leave it until the summer. You need to make decisions now because there are players who need to have their contracts looked at now because they run out in the summer, and you need to make signings, and you need to know where there's gaps and who you. And I'm aware that there's been conversations this week with players in the academy and other players about their future and where it lies. So it's difficult, it's like them talking about Manchester United. Are they going to make any signings in January if they've not got a head coach? Or Celtic going to make any signings because they've got a temp? So for Edinburgh to make the decision now makes sense because people know who the coach is going to be. The coach can then have players that wants to work with and can see a future in. And I think Sean has made a play on there's a plan, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, and that has been the message right the way sort of through. But I think I think that Sean's hand was a wee bit what's the word? Sort of almost hamstrung because he was given a bunch of players when Sean took over.
You're really struggling to multitask, eh?
Yeah, I am. Sorry about that. Sean got a bunch of players that are a year younger than the young guys that we've talked about with Glasgow.
Right, go on. You mentioned this to me on the phone. Go on, like, is that a plan? Like, how do you mean, and why have Glasgow got people that are a year older than Edinburgh? Did Glasgow get a shot of young players and then it's Edinburgh's turn and then it's Glasgow? Like, why is that? Why are they a year younger?
Yeah, to be honest, in that detail, I'm not sure. Because you would like to have thought that they would have been more evenly dispersed between the two clubs. Because what we've had is Edinburgh relying on, certainly in Sean's first season, an older squad. You think about even last season, they could have fielded Matt Scott and Mark Bennett, both sort of well into their 30s in the midfield. Somebody like Hamish Watson is seemingly persona non grata this season and I kind of understand that because Freddie Douglas has been so good. But then why did Hamish play all the important games last season? Ben Healy, who's by no means an old head, has been cast aside to accommodate Ross Thompson and Cammy Scott, who are actually not that much younger. So in some positions, Jamie's obviously left, Jamie Ritchie's left, and Liam McConnell's filled that gap. And we say all the time, Tom Jordan left Glasgow or Ali Price left Edinburgh, and these opportunities should open gaps for young Scottish players. But I'm not sure how much of that is planning, because at the start of the season, I'm not sure if you and I would have had Liam McConnell as the start in Edinburgh 6 virtually every week this season.
And let me jump in there. Sorry to take you off your train of thought, but part of that is because we're not seeing what's going on. Like we're not there, and you speak to anybody, and they're saying that Liam McConnell in pre-season was all over it, and it just was the stick out. And you can't look like Liam McConnell is not being handed something because he's a young Scottish player. He's being handed it because he's been good enough. Yeah,
and I think that's fair. But I suppose what I meant by that is when you're doing projection, Liam seems to have made great strides in pre-season. You would like to have thought that this time last year, when Edinburgh were in contract negotiations or found out that Jamie was leaving, Sean and others are making a plan, saying, okay, well, who do we project is going to be in that position? Is that possibly Luke Crosby? Is it Ben Muncaster? Is it? And I think you get 3 or 4 names down before the great young hope Liam McConnell makes the list. But he's in a combination of his pre-season and then the injuries to others, he's forced his way up. So I get that we're the Edinburgh champion in this, development of young players, but some of that has been forced upon them. They've obviously got a small squad to work with in comparison to most clubs. You look at, they didn't replace Ali Price with a senior scrum half, so that's kind of opened an opportunity. Harry Morris, Paddy Harrison have had game time, Ollie Blythe-Lafferty, but I still don't think we should be getting carried away, because I think there was a comment that had put up earlier. The dizzy heights of 10th, like Edinburgh are 10th in the league, and some of the stuff that's come out, Sean said today, I think results have largely been good. I'm not sure many Edinburgh fans would agree with that, to be honest. I think that's an unfair reflection on the inconsistency that continues, and that's not all young players. And we're now, and we've talked about this the last 2 weeks, but we're now in a situation where Darcy and Doohan, because of their club form, are going to really struggle to get in the Scotland squad, the Scotland team. And you could make a case that there's only maybe 1 or 2 Edinburgh players deserve to be in that Scotland team for the first game of the Six Nations.
Last year you spoke a lot about KPIs. It was top 8 and quarter-final place, I think. Was that right?
In the Challenge Cup, yeah.
In the Challenge Cup, that was the KPI. You've been pretty quiet with that this year. Was that, like, how did you know those were the KPIs last year, and do you know what the KPIs are this year?
I think broadly they'll be pretty similar. I think getting into the playoffs would be that box ticked in the URC. I think finishing top 4 was probably a target at the start of the season. That seems unrealistic now. And I think reaching the knockouts in the Champions Cup will be deemed a success. Now,
just before we, what do they need? What needs to happen? I'm not quite sure I fully understand what's coming up. So, if Edinburgh beat Bath, that's obviously a good thing. What Edinburgh need to happen this weekend?
I'm delighted you've asked. So we've just published a piece on the site from Top of the Moon that details all the Edinburgh permutations. But
right, okay, good.
Broadly,
Top of the Moon is the man.
Edinburgh need 2 points to qualify, to be assured of qualification, regardless of all other results.
Oh, okay, right, okay.
If they get nothing, they can still qualify, but they'll be dependent on the other results in their pool falling in their favour.
Okay, so 2 points, 4 tries, and staying within 7. Worst case scenario.
Yeah, so if it finishes 75-68, then Edinburgh actually won't care. I mean, Michael Todd might, the defence coach, but yeah, there you go.
I love that you pulled out 75-68. I've got the injury list up in front of me here. So Charlie McCaig hasn't really featured. Rhys Litterick hasn't really featured. Rob Carmichael hasn't really featured. This season, Masesi hasn't featured. You then go into quite a run of forwards: Tom Curry, Luke Crosby, Darcy Ray, Sam Skinner, Paddy Harrison, Marshall Sykes, Boan Venter, Dylan Richardson, Grant Gilchrist, and then Pierre Schumann, Magnus Bradbury, Liam McConnell are all rested. Potentially that's a match day 13 players.
It's a pretty handy squad.
And then you look at the backs, and it's not quite the same, but it's still Finlay Thompson, who has featured, but not to a huge extent. Conor McAlpine, similar. But then you've got Duan, who's injured, and Wes, who's being rested. And Wes is not an international player. So what's the story with Wes being rested? I think you've got a story about that, have you?
Well, I think to be clear on this rest thing for this weekend, obviously the Scotland guys like Pierre, fall under the international player protocol where they can't play so many games in a row. I would be stunned if, given Liam was only in the Scotland camp for 1 week of the 4 in the autumn. Now, they might have plans to call him up in the Six Nations, and fair enough. And he's a young guy, but I would be stunned if he is part of that Scotland mandated rest group. I think the same for Magnus, because again, his involvement with Scotland's been sparing, and as you say, Wes isn't an international. So to me, and nobody's implicitly sort of spelled this out, but to me, these are Sean Everitt rests, rather than Scottish Rugby saying we have to rest your internationals this week. And I think that has to be with an eye on, as I say, Edinburgh need 2 points, but they could still make it through if results, which are quite likely, fall in their favour anyway. Edinburgh need to beat the Bulls next week. So I think they'll go fully loaded at home to get a result against the Bulls and have basically accepted the Bath game. They won't tell us that. And Sean he was asked about the Cast game. What if it goes the same way? And he said, well, you've got to trust the players, and I don't think it will. But this is a more callow group that they've sent to a much more difficult place than the group they sent to Cast. So the scoreboard operator could be busy at the Rec tomorrow night. I hope not. But at the same time, I think Sean has taken the view that actually getting URC points is, at this stage, more important. But there is a scenario where Edinburgh don't qualify and they can finish 5th and end up in the Challenge Cup. And I just wonder, how bad a prospect does that look at the minute? Given the injuries, and I'm not saying Sean's throwing this game, definitely not, but, if Edinburgh were to be in the Challenge Cup, they might fancy a much deeper run than, for example, if they finish 16th seeds in the Champions Cup and play Bordeaux in the last 16.
There's a lot of benefit to being in that knockout of the Champions Cup, though, that we need to discuss here. One of the names that is missing, Cammy Scott. So he's not rested. He's not listed. Did you get any background on Cammy Scott?
No, I must admit, I think we could have been on Zoom this morning with Sean for a good couple hours. His time was obviously slightly more limited than that, and a lot of the conversation was taken up about the contract and what the plan is moving forward and that kind of detail. So no, but as far as I understand it, this is
the team that's picked.
This is just a rotation.
One of the positives, Satala's boys getting these debuts, so another debut to add to what's a pretty long list. I think part of when Sean was talking, there's been a lot of players who have got debuts with Sean. There's been a lot of young players who have got broken into the team. So to see the name Satala lining up, there's a lot of Scottish connection there. To see him starting on that left wing in a backline that's pretty experienced, with Benny Velicott back as skipper, Ross Thompson at 10. You've got Langer at 12. Piers O'Connor comes in at 13 with Matt Curry struggling, Darcy, and good to see Harry Pat back.
Yeah, it is good to see Harry Patterson back, but what a baptism of fire for Mal Satala. On you go. You haven't played a game of series, played Prem Cup, but I'm not counting that as senior competitive rugby because teams put out academy sides. Now you're going to make your debut against Henry Arundel or against
Cockanassinger. That's a battle. Satala against Cockanassinger, that's a battle. I hope they get a chance to have a crack at each other.
In the Champions Cup, in a game that actually Edinburgh could do with scoring a few tries in, and Finn Russell's the opposition standoff.
Who's he?
I mean, he's quite good. If you've ever seen him, he's quite decent.
The Bath team stacked. The Edinburgh back row, like Benny Muncaster, I just hope he can get a run of games. It'll be tough because you've got Maggie to come back in, you've got Liam McConnell to come back in, but I really hope Benny Muncaster can have a run at things because he's really not had a huge amount of luck. Freddie Douglas is obviously in there. Really interesting to see how he goes because Sivens can still perform when your team's under pressure. And, I think 5 turnovers, is that right, on Friday night against Gloucester?
Yep.
In a game that, at times they were under pressure and some of those turnovers were at some pretty important points. what an opportunity for Freddie Douglas to show everybody who he is, especially with Six Nations coming.
Oh, 100%. And like as I said last week, I spoke to John Barclay during the week, and he was saying, actually, yes, Rory Darge is a very good rugby player, but he's not Freddie Douglas over the ball. And I said to you, I remember being at the 20s trophy, and Freddie was almost too quick even for the officials, and at some stages it looks like that at this level. But what a challenge, because Bath in response have gone, okay, well, we'll pick Guy Pepper and Sam Underhill and give you two proper sevens to deal with in response, So the breakdown was an area that when we spoke to Edinburgh at the start of the week, they picked out as, look, we think Bath sort of did us over there a bit in the Challenge Cup semi-final last season. So
Interesting.
It'll be interesting to see how they combat that. I think, Pierre's not maybe renowned for stealing the ball, but he's just a nuisance. Not having him there will be a miss in every facet. But look, I think it might come down to a bit of that Edinburgh trying to take every bit of positivity they can, and somebody
Tom,
like Freddie.
I'm chuffed Tom Dodd's there, because we've spoken about Tom Dodd before, and he's not one of the frontliners, but when he comes on, he gives you it, and I'm looking forward to seeing pretty much, well, not just, but that back row in this game against this team, kind of a free hit, like go for it, lads, like show yourself, give yourself that opportunity, and then like you and Ashman, I'm interested to see Ashman and Harry Morris. We've spoken a lot about Scotland hookers. Are they now first and second choice for Scotland?
Well, purely on form, I would have Gregor Hiddleston ahead of Harry Morris. But given Gregor Hiddleston was overlooked by Gregor in the autumn, you have to say, they can't be far away. George Turner's having a tough old time at Quins, and he probably is second choice purely on experience alone. But certainly Harry Morris isn't far away, and he's definitely in that conversation.
But Gregor's got a World Cup to plan for.
Yeah.
So, and George Turner, talking contracts, I think you were saying your understanding is George Turner's only with Harlequins for this season. And the way Harlequins are going, who knows what's going to happen in turnover and churn of players looking to next year. So if and you can't look at Six Nations as a building block, I know that is too important, but the World Cup performance is how Gregor's going to sign off. The squad has to be in the state that is flying. Is Harry Morris in a year's time going to be second choice to Ian Ashman?
Yeah, I mean, there's every possibility that he is. That Harry Morris has overtaken Paddy Harrison. That he's over.
And a lot of that's on that Paddy's not been able to play. But
yeah, but
you take your chance when it comes.
Exactly.
Yeah, interesting. And Ewan McVie debut last week, potential. I mean, go for it, son. Come on against Gloucester at home. Go on against Bath at the Rec. What a start to a career. His old man must be going down to Bath to watch him. His old man was in tears on Friday night seeing his boy make his debut. It was class. It was one of those brilliant moments. I saw there was a comment flashed up there about Ben Healy. Obviously, Ben Healy's on the bench.
Is it make or break?
A tactical jobby. I mean, quality name, and it's given me a chance to say jobby on a podcast. So fair play to you. But to have, no, I don't think this can't be make or break. It can't be right. You go on against Bath and make yourself a hero, son. But the chances are becoming tougher and tougher for quite a lot of the players. In some of the, well, pretty much in everything. There's players in there like Callum Hunter-Hill's getting a chance, Glenn Young's getting a chance, Ollie Blythe-Lafferty's getting chances, Mikey Jones is getting a chance. So there's quite a lot of players in there who are getting a chance to show themselves. If Ben Healy comes on, and I don't know what the game's going to look like when Ben Healy comes on.
Yeah, and I think that's the point. I don't, he's not played for 3 months for anybody, and now he's probably going to get 20 minutes, 25 minutes at the Rec. Who knows what state the game will be in? I don't think we can judge or read too much into that. I almost think, in a perverse way, Cammy Scott's maybe just been taken out the firing line. The 1872 Cups games didn't go that well. You could put Cammy Scott on the bench, or actually you could just say to Ben Healy, we need you this week. I'm not sure it necessarily changes the pecking order of things. I just think Ben gets a shot. Sean always talks about players maybe get 2 or 3 games in a row. I'm not sure I really see that, to be honest. So we'll see how it goes. But I don't think it's make or break. But there's no way that when Ben Healy was at the World Cup, just over 2 years ago, he thought, oh yeah, I'll sign for Edinburgh just to be third choice and not even sit on the bench. Like, the fall there is massive, and we're now in the stage of, if the second half of this season doesn't go his way, I think he needs to look at going somewhere else and getting a new start, because clearly on the trajectory that it's on, Edinburgh hasn't worked so far.
Just last point on Edinburgh before we have a quick mention of Bath and we move along the M8. Ollie Blythe Lafferty, fresh Boroughmuir boy. Freddie Douglas, fresh Stu Melboy. Satala, fresh, just out the door. Harry Patterson is maybe not that fresh, but he's played so little rugby because of injury. Harry Morris, fresh. I'm going to call him a Melrose boy rather than a Fetty's boy. Mikey Jones, fresh. Ewan McVie, fresh. Jack Brown. There's a lot of pups in there who are getting an enormous opportunity to go and play Bath at the Rec. Huge opportunity.
Yeah, and in some ways, there's a lot on the line for Edinburgh, but as we've discussed, they might make it through without needing any points. I think this is a pressure off, and actually, let's see if they've got a trick or two up their sleeve. If they've got, and it might be a game like this where some of the bits that have looked clunky and awkward, and it might click, but to the same degree, if it goes the way it's gone the last few weeks, and other teams get on top, and we know what Edinburgh's away form is like, it could be a long old evening. And I think what Edinburgh don't want is to then be chasing 4 tries, or because somebody like Finn will absolutely pick them apart. And that, you said a word on Bath, like that Bath team is absolute. It's like Rockstar 1 to 15.
You say that, but you've got Tom Dunn, who's absolutely not a rock star, but I think he's called the King of Bath.
Yeah, and I mean, is like one of these classic.
He's so annoying.
Classic Prem player.
Brilliant on your team. Hate playing against them.
100%. And I remember last week, I can't remember who the conversation started with, but we were talking about, it was Lewis Ludlow. And then I mentioned the Alex Waller at Northampton, and Tom Dunn is 100% in that mode. He's probably made his Bath debut.
He'll only ever play for Bath.
Yeah, and he might have made his debut in like 1978.
74.
But he's still there. He still does a job every week. He comes off the pitch and he looks like an extra from Lord of the Rings. And he gets patched up, and the week later he just does it all again. And but those are the players that are around all the Finn Russells and the Thockenham Singers and the Henry Arundels and all these great the rock stars. You need a few of them, and Bath have just got so many.
Benno Bano and Thomas Dutoy. I've never heard of those two.
The guy Thomas Dutoy, I'm not sure
him and Quinn Rue. Like you don't want to be picking up their meal bill. Like they are some big humans. And then that back row, Guy Pepper, what a player that is. And then when he left Newcastle fans gave him stick, but unreal. Underhill. I still think Ben Spencer is one of the best scrum halves. I thought he should have gone with the Lions. I'm totally biased. I think Ben Spencer is class. The back line, there's a lot there. And then I'm a bit gutted Cam Redpath's on the bench.
But similarly, sorry to butt in, but Cam Redpath to come on when this game could be like the Harlem Globetrotters, go on and make an impact against a Scottish team. You missed out on the autumn squad. Like, it could be made for him. I think it's going to be tough for Edinburgh. Just one quick one, all in the games on, and I know this isn't really a Scottish subject, but we should probably talk a little bit. Razor, Scott Robertson obviously lost his job as All Blacks head coach overnight, but I was watching a press conference from New Zealand in the announcement of David Kirk, the
amazing guy,
chairman of NZ Rugby, was talking about the way they've come to the decision and the ramifications. And just on that point, should Six Nations coaches be looking over their shoulders? He was asked, Latman's kindly pointed out his former Ayr player Scott Robertson. That's right. Like when Donald Trump became, I don't know how we've got onto this.
Oh, careful.
But when Donald Trump became president, there was a paper up north who used the analogy that his mother had.
His mum's from Skye or something,
Yeah, Lewis, I think. But yeah, she's from one of the islands. Anyway, should Six Nations coaches be looking over their shoulders? No.
Nah.
Because in his contract, there's a stand down of, I think, about a year where he's not allowed to work for, I think, another international team. So interesting timing from that point of view. I wonder what his next move will be. Sadly, he will not be the next Edinburgh coach. But we'll wait and see where he ends up, because despite how this has all ended, I think his work with the Crusaders speaks volumes, and Scott Robertson is obviously a very, very good coach.
Yeah, it is an interesting one. It seems like it's the right thing, though, that it didn't seem like the autumn was quite as smooth as it was supposed to be. In terms of Six Nations coaches, I think they're all reasonably settled until the World Cup, and then like every 4 years, there'll be a washout in various places and replacement. Who knows where Andy Farrell goes next? Borthwick looks like England are getting sorted. Wales, they have to go all in on Steve Tandy for as long as possible, because another change there is not going to help anybody. France will do French. Italy maybe, but then he's not really got any affinity with Italy, and I think there's now enough people who are around, and what they've got going on looks to be reasonably positive.
I often wonder if the Italian Federation regrets sacking Franco.
Well, possibly, but when you look at, because I think Franco does as well, doesn't he? He says, well, listen, here's, some of that is because of me. Like, some of the success now is because of him.
Yeah.
But what they've brought in, seems to be working, and they're working hard underneath with their various A games. They've been promoting a lot of their under 18 and under 16 games recently, saying, look at what we're doing. I mean, the number of players in Italy is more than we've got here. And that's what, I come back to this all the time, our local bias. We're tiny wee, and hopefully doing the best with our resources, but we've nae divine right to be outperforming any of these nations. And in Italy, I've got a lot of admiration for them, and I don't know a lot about it. I've got a couple of Italian mates and Kitty's at Treviso, who I'm very proud of, that he's now the head coach. So I've got a wee bit of interest in it, but I just think when you see an environment like that where rugby isn't the main thing, and you can see them performing the way they're performing, it's a really positive thing.
Do you know, I'm going to totally change the subject there, and you've just described someone as tiny wee, And I always remember, and I sometimes joke with Mossy once described someone when I was doing an interview with him as muckle huge.
Muckle huge, yeah.
Is that a Gala thing?
Well, I'm for Stouse, I don't know.
You know what I mean? It's a very unique description. But
I'm quite often compared to Chris Patterson. Compared to him, I was useless.
I mean, you could have summed that up any better. You know, just on the last point I'll make on the All Blacks thing, you look at names to replace Razor, and it seems like Jamie Joseph.
Yeah, he's prime because he was the All Blacks 15 coach. So him and I quite like there's something bouncing around about Jamie Joseph would then hire Tony Brown, Highlanders. That then weakens the box. It strengthens the All Blacks. And
yeah.
But there's,
there's
so many people in New Zealand. There's so many coaches around.
You know, I read something last night that named a few possibles, and Dave Rennie was one. Joe Schmidt, Vern Cotter was another.
There's no chance Vern's getting it.
Now I think Vern's time for a job like that has come and gone. Sadly,
we're even talking about Foster coming back.
Foster
the players like Foster. Like Foster didn't go because the players didn't want him.
Yeah, and I think that's, you know, we've heard all the Ardy Savea stuff, and David Kirk was moved to suggest that wasn't why Razor lost his job. But do you know what I thought was interesting? Was what he did say was we weren't convinced by the team were displaying the same patterns in all these games, and we weren't convinced that we were on the right trajectory, was the word he used, to sort it. And I thought, God, this sounds familiar. And he used the phrase, now is the last time we can make a change before the World Cup, and not making a change, as difficult as it is harder than sticking with what you've got because you're just sticking with what you've got. And I thought, I wonder if anybody's got speakers, megaphones, that they could play that into the offices at Murrayfield.
Oh, wow. Geez, you've gone big there, my man. A lot of people are praising David Kirk in the way that he's done it. I watched a little clip of John Kirwan, who I'm a massive fan of. He's a hero of mine. And he had said, he did a bit to camera about the change. And he said, let's keep this human. Like, let's, you know, we're dealing with a human here who has pretty much lost his job, so let's be respectful. And I really loved that. And then he goes on to say, but you know, a change has been made the way David Kirk has dealt with it. And you know, there's a lot of people in New Zealand will say their union is this and the people that are running it are that, and you know, we all chuck mud at our own. Your man at Munster, whose name's gone out of my head,
Clayton McMillan,
he's but it's probably too quick for him. I think he maybe gets to be the next All Black coach, but there's a succession planning that I like to see and to hear. That's my biggest concern. Is I don't know, you know, when Gregor finishes the World Cup, I don't know who the next coach would be, and I don't know when the next Scotland coach will be Scottish, which also bothers me. And I don't know when the next Edinburgh coach will be a Scotsman or the next Glasgow coach will be a Scotsman. And I don't know when the next head coach of the women's team will be a Scotsman, because at the moment we've only got one Scotsman in one of those four head coach roles, and that's Gregor. So that kind of thing bothers me more than it should.
Yeah, and I think it was interesting that was one of the points that was asked at the press conference in New Zealand was, have you explored the possibility that somebody who's not a Kiwi could coach the All Blacks? And the answer was basically, not yet.
Yeah, hell will be freezing over. I can't see a time, you know, and some of the social media that I follow, because I'm a big fan of the NPC or the Heartland Championship, whatever you want to call it. And Edinburgh have obviously just signed somebody who's come from Hawke's Bay, which and that level's a level I enjoy, and you know, I love the passion that they have for that. But those coaches are then promoted to Super Rugby coaching jobs and head coach at Super Rugby, and then they get to be the All Blacks 15s coach or the 7s coach and then they can progress. There's a really obvious development pathway for coaches that potentially here, you know, Kenny Murray came out the club game. Bob Christie came out the club game. John DL came out the club game. But then, we've got Duncan Hodge floating around, who was a Scotland coach and was head coach Edinburgh, who's now no longer involved, and he's not even coaching an age group international team. Or so there's a lot, and we've got Cal McRae at Treviso, and there's coaches all. Stevie Scott's at Bath. There's coaches all over the place. But I'm not sure who.
Clark Laidlaw's at the Hurricanes.
Clark Laidlaw's at the Hurricanes. So there's Simon Cross is at Old. Geez, we could go on and on and on. We've got sidetracked, but that pathway is something that bugs me. But it is interesting when you look at New Zealand, because although they've got more players than us and resource than us, they're still a wee country.
Yes, they are. We have gone from Edinburgh via New Zealand. Should we talk about Glasgow?
Nah, I'm done. My tea's on the table. Yeah, so before we talk about Glasgow and Saracens, obviously pretty sizable news, but I don't think any of us were surprised. Adam Hastings to Montpellier, which I think was one of the worst kept secrets going. I think the Shuggy announcement I called on here at some point, but I don't think we saw coming. I certainly wasn't expecting it this week. So people saying it's weird that Sean Everett's been announced now, it's not really, because this is when decisions are being made for the summer, so that plans can be made in the summer. So Shuggy's also heading to France.
Yeah, and I think when, we obviously had known about, we talked, I think, before Christmas or around Christmas about the Adam Hastings to Montpellier one. Look, it's disappointing for Glasgow because they lost Tom Jordan last year. Adam's obviously stepped up and been first choice this season and played really well. We've talked about he's looked happy. He's had a run of games because he's not been injured. Glasgow will be disappointed to lose him. I think there was a few comments I saw on the social media posts saying that Glasgow's statements on both counts read like they were written through gritted teeth. I'm not sure that's the case at all. I think Glasgow will be very thankful for particularly Hugh's contribution over two spells, but look, Adam as well. I am less bothered about Glasgow losing Hugh Jones. I think he's played 24 games since he came back from Quins. And that seems mad, but I think he only played 12 times in the season they won the league. He played 8 or 9 games last season, the same the year before. So he's not a guy Glasgow get huge amounts out of. I would be much more worried if Glasgow had lost Xander Fagerson or Jack Dempsey's out of contract. So I'm really interested to see what happens there. I hope the fact that they've essentially lost Adam and Hugh off the wage bill means there's money to spend for keeping Dempsey.
Yeah, I disagree. I would like Dempsey to go in the same way Shuggy, Adam, various others have left. I think if Dempsey goes, Glasgow have got, and you talk about them all the time, the ones that can play second row or back row. There's players in there need to play rugby. If Jack Dempsey, and he would be really attractive in France because of the way he plays, he'd be attractive in the Premiership. I think let him go, and he's Scottish and he can come back and play, and he is who he is. He's going to pick up injuries because he's so abrasive in the way he plays, but it frees up another slot. I wouldn't have an issue. I get what you mean about the wage bill, because Shuggy Going's probably freed up about $4.5 million. So with Dempsey, I think make it a bit like Anna on Frozen and let him go.
But I think from a Glasgow point of view, and Franco has made his feelings clear at the end of last season about losing two of his sort of loyal lieutenants in Cancellieri and Venta. Sorry, I don't know how I forgot.
I know, because Franco mentions him every second press conference.
But also, Henkel particularly was a guy that, if everybody was fit, probably wouldn't have got in definitely wouldn't have got in the team. Might have been on the bench, but he was kind of a guy that could help Glasgow through the periods where they didn't have their internationals. I think what is different here is if you lose Hugh, Adam, and Dempsey, and then don't replace them with like for like. I mean, the Hugh one, I'm less worried about because Stafford McDowell's there, Ollie Smith's there. There's opportunities for a Duncan Munn or a Kerr Yule or Johnny Ventisai. What I would be concerned about is all of a sudden it's all on you, Dan Lancaster. He played brilliantly against Claremont, and we probably don't even have time to talk about the games. But I thought he was excellent last weekend. But his form has been a bit up and down. So I think Glasgow need a 10. I asked Fergus Burke a wee bit tongue-in-cheek yesterday if he fancied a move to Scotstoun, and he replied saying he was Saracens through and through. Although he did say, for now.
I know. I was going to say, your headline cracked me up. I'm Saracens through and through for now. Like, okay.
Like, I'm not sure Fergus has grasped the concept of through and through. Anyway.
But that's and you've got Matty Irwin there. I don't know, and I don't know what the depth chart looks like, and I don't know if there's somebody that they're going to announce and ta-da, look who we've got. Maybe Finn's coming back for the $4 billion that they're saving on Adam Hastings and Shuggy. All in the game talking about shame to break up Hui Pilotu. I wouldn't be sad if Sione went either.
I think you'd never guess you were the Edinburgh Stadium announcer. I think from a Glasgow...
But the Edinburgh at the moment don't, like Duan, Darcy, there's young bucks coming through. There are players like Jamie. I'm sad to see Jamie go, but I think it was the best thing for Jamie Ritchie, and it opened the door for Liam McConnell and potentially Connor Boyle and Luke Crosby. And we're not going to get these players coming through if there are bed blockers there and some of these older boys that play for Scotland. And Sione, of course, I want Edinburgh and Glasgow to be the two strongest teams. I didn't want any of those players to be away. But realistically, to develop the game and to develop the players and to create opportunities, we need them to go. We need them to, because ultimately the Scotland team is it. And Edinburgh and Glasgow at the moment serve that.
But I think what we also want, and what Franco will be campaigning for, is Glasgow have had to deal with a smaller squad this season. They've lost the guys and they will lose more. I suspect they will lose Sione Vailanu. They've lost JP Dupria. When Richie Gray went to Japan, they wanted Alex Craig, and they wanted Alex Craig, I think, immediately from Scarlets. But because Yari sprung from nowhere and proved he could play at URC level, they were put off signing Alex Craig until the summer. But Glasgow have then proved that this smaller squad of young Scottish players, barring an aberration at Scarlets, can actually compete in the URC, and these top guys can compete in Europe. And actually, if you look, Glasgow didn't build on winning the league in 2015. I would argue they didn't build on winning the league in 2024 because last year was a disappointment. If Glasgow were to go on a run in Europe and reach a semi-final, a final, or whatever it might be, they can't then regress from that. So there has to be an element of, I know the Scotland team is the be-all and end-all, and that the pro teams serve that, but if Glasgow are serious about being, serious title challengers on both competitions, I think they need a core of international players in their first choice team. I think where the difference lies is Edinburgh haven't shown that ability to challenge for titles or be competitive in deep into European competitions. And I think, hindsight's a wonderful thing, but Edinburgh should have let Duhan go before he signed this current contract. I think, that is a large chunk of the wages taken up on a guy who you either don't get the ball to or sadly this season has been injured.
You talk about me being Edinburgh Stadium announcer, we're talking about Glasgow, and you've got it back to Edinburgh in no time at all. So didn't he start chucking mud at me, Gavin Harper? The Glasgow, like, and we're maybe getting into territory that we want to play. Well, we definitely have. This is where I don't know if there's what the plan is. What do Glasgow need to be competing at those things? Now Franco does, because Franco is ultimately, and Sean is ultimately, Sean wants Edinburgh to do well, and Franco wants Glasgow to do well, because that's their job and that's where they are. And Glasgow are in a position now where they really can, because they're sitting so pretty. And you're right, they would need international players to do that, but the wage bill is the wage bill, and I don't think it's getting any bigger anytime soon.
No.
I don't know if they'll be rewarded with, well, if you do well, there's an extra 500 grand on your budget to go and like build on it. So I know what you mean about the first one. They didn't build on it, because I would say that was more planned. What Franco won was that wasn't in the plan. Like, that all happened in 18 months, and in some respects was right place, right time, and by God did they take the chance. But that was difficult to build on, because that wasn't the plan. I don't think.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think they probably also didn't then expect to lose the players and the volume of players they've lost, because David Nucifora came in, and in the midst of all that decided that there was going to be fewer foreign players, etc. So I get there's nuances to it, but could Ben Healy move to Glasgow?
Yes.
Well, I mean, yes is the answer. Is Ben Healy a Glasgow fly half? No, I'm not convinced he is. I think Ben Healy is a nuts and bolts, kick the corners. I'm not sure Ben Healy is the guy who says, in your own 22, we're having a go here, lads, and I'm chucking him.
But I know, but the environment is. He could be. I mean, Ross Thompson's obviously been, and he's at Edinburgh, so he's not going. Cammy Scott's not going. He's an Edinburgh boy through. Ben Healy, if one was to go along the road, then it would be Ben Healy.
And do you know what? If he was to go, and I think I said this to you, I certainly said it to somebody during the week. We've seen it before. When Richard Cockrell admitted that he got it wrong about Rory Darge, George Turner could hardly get a game at Edinburgh, moved along the M8. Players have gone from Edinburgh and really struggled at Edinburgh. They've gone to Glasgow and it's just clicked. And there's no reason why that wouldn't apply to a Ben Healy. So I wouldn't rule it out. I certainly wouldn't rule it out.
I don't know that is. So in a situation like that, is David Nucifora ultimately who's looking at the squads and making decisions like that? Is that part of his role? So obviously Sean wants to deal with Edinburgh and Franco wants to deal with Glasgow, and the CEOs are sort of furnishing that. But is David Nucifora is looking at the whole thing, going, right, well, actually there and there, is that part of the remit?
Yeah, and I think there would be a bit of input probably as well from Gregor to say, look, if we get this, if we can get somebody more game time, take the Ali Price case. He was going to be third choice probably at Glasgow and not playing that often after the World Cup. So the decision was he's got to move to Edinburgh, and Ali, to be fair, established himself at Edinburgh, and that was probably one of the few where somebody's come from west to east and it's worked. I think you see a lot more players going east to west and they're a success. So yeah, I think the Ben Healy one is interesting. I do think Glasgow, they've obviously got Charlie Savala, who we've not talked about, as an option at 10, but I think they need a more senior head. Ben Healy could maybe be that, although he's still a pretty young guy. But I'm also interested in the sort of Piers O'Connor mould if Glasgow are allowed to go into the market for somebody who's not Scottish qualified. And I say that because Josh McKay becomes Scottish soon, the end of this year. So he is off their list. And then you say, well, okay, can Glasgow then get somebody, and they'll need somebody. If
I would greet if Glasgow signed somebody that wasn't Scottish qualified to play standoff.
I think there's I think there's a chance that they get somebody, but I think it would be somebody that's a squad player rather than a nailed on starter.
I would greet. Glasgow obviously coming up against Saracens. Europe is so. Talk me through permutations for Glasgow.
Well, let's keep it simple. Glasgow win, they'll be top of the pool, and depending on other results, Glasgow win with a bonus point. They could be the top seeds overall. There is a situation, I think, where a sort of strange set of results happen, and we could have Glasgow Edinburgh in the last 16. From a selfish point of view, having watched the 1872 Cup games, let's not have that. Let's have somebody else. So
would that so Glasgow would get home advantage for that?
They would, yeah. So Glasgow, and just on that, it's an interesting subject because there's been a lot said about where would Glasgow play if they got through. So we know that Glasgow, if they get through, or they are through, if they get a home last 16 tie, it will be at Scotstoun. Quarter-final, by my understanding, would also be at Scotstoun, but because of the Commonwealth Games, and actually less so because of the tournament rules, they would be required to play a semi-final should they obviously get that far. And I've got the crystal ball out again. They would be required to play that at a neutral home country venue. So the two options, obviously, seem to be Hampden and Murrayfield. And then the finals in Bilbao. So there's a lot to happen before then, but it's worth people bearing in mind that, Glasgow would basically be at home through the knockout stages if they can finish in as top seeds, which I think would be magic. And look, we've seen in these playoff runs, like it does make all the difference. The stats for top of the moon again will be able to tell us, but the stats for teams that win away, particularly in Champions Cup knockout games, are very, very, very skewed. So,
it would be quite a moneymaker if they can, if both teams can get deep. It would make some money.
Yeah, 100%.
And Sarries, Sunday night's going to be a cracker, I think, and I'm really interested to see how it goes. What's the Sarries like? What's their situation?
They also need to win. So they beat Toulouse last week. Chatting to Fergus Burke yesterday, and a great couple of weeks for him if he could get one over on Blair, who played 10 for Toulouse, and then get one over on all the Glasgow Scotland players. But as Slatman says, I think both him and Andy Onyema Christie need big games, because all of a sudden they've gone from guys who were probably quite assured of being in the Scotland 23 to all of a sudden, the pressure's on. So they need to win. I think they're like in sort of Edinburgh's situation. Sorry, I'm just quickly looking up the pool tables. I think they're pretty likely to go through. Yes,
they're going to come fully loaded. So that's going to be both teams have to go for it.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it'll be interesting to see how Glasgow play this, because there's every chance that Sarries go Fergus Burke at 10, Owen Farrell at 12, and almost try and manipulate the sort of kick-in game, pin Glasgow in their own half. I'm not convinced the weather looks that great for Sunday night, but it's Glasgow. When does it ever look that great? So, actually looking at this table, Saracens could be in with a home run as well. So they're on 10 points. Now, obviously, not many teams come to Scotstoun and win with a bonus point, but if they did, that and Glasgow got nothing, that would put them level on points. So, it's maybe not quite as open as Edinburgh's pool, but there's certainly a lot to play for in that in that group, and I think it'll be a really interesting game.
Yeah, well, hopefully both teams go well against big English sides with reputations. But the Bath team looks pretty fierce. I'm interested to see the Sarries team that comes up. But opportunity for lots of Scottish players to have a crack and for people to see Scottish against Scottish players, which I think is also quite exciting. And just sort of final point. Women's squad was announced today. We've not had a chance to, or you've not had a chance to speak to Sione, the new head coach, or any of the players about that. It's a pretty big squad announcement, so we'll get to the women's squad at some point in the next couple of weeks as they come into camp January, and then start building towards their Six Nations as well. So there's plenty going on, my man. It's been good to chat.
It always is. Yeah, there's never a quiet week, but this one has been particularly busy.
Yeah, it's a belter. Well, good man. Good to see you. I hope you enjoy your weekend's viewing. No doubt there's going to be plenty for you to scribble about.
Yes, I'm sure there will. And we should actually tell people as well, the Scotland squad for the Six Nations is out next week. So we'll jump on and we'll dissect that once that's been announced. I'm not 100% sure of when, but it's certainly out next week. So we'll be around, and then before you know it, we'll be right into the midst of Six Nations build up.
Yeah, I might not be available because I have let Gregor know that I am available for selection, so that might take me out of the podcast. So just to have that one on your back burner just now.
Yeah, we'll definitely bear that in mind. I might be in the A squad. Yes, there will be an A squad announced as well for the game in Italy.
I'm glad you understood that, because I read that as a team squad as well, and I didn't understand what the question was. Yes, an A team squad. I'm glad you're here.
Aren't we all? I don't know where we would be if it was you talking to yourself for an hour.
Oh, hey, I would be happy. Like, I don't know if anybody would tune in, but anyway, cheers, big fella. Final word from our sponsor. The Scotland Rugby News podcast was brought to you by S1 Jobs. It was time to hand in your transfer request and head over to s1jobs.com and upload your CV right now. There are thousands of jobs all across Scotland, and you can find the one for you. So go on, kick off your search right now at S1 Jobs. Thanks, folks. Have a great weekend. We'll be back next week.